You feel it before you understand it, a quiet shiver in the dark, a shift so small it almost disappears into the noise of everyday life. But somewhere beyond the reach of sunlight, something ancient is moving. A traveler with no past, no origin we can trace, drifting through the solar system, with an energy signature that doesn't behave like anything we've measured before. And without warning, the orbits of dust rock and frozen metal begin to bend, as if the whole cosmic sea is holding its breath. Before we follow that disturbance, before you step into the path of 3IATLAS and watch how its presence ripples across the planets, let me ask you one small thing. If stories like this help you feel more connected to the universe, if they make your night quieter, or spark that little spark of curiosity you've been missing, you're welcome to stay to like this video. When you genuinely enjoy it, maybe subscribe if you want more nights like this, or leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. I always read them, every single one, because it reminds me this universe feels a little smaller when we explore it together. Now, take a breath. Let the lights dim just a little, and let's step closer to the place where this disturbance truly began, where the first tremor in space whispered a warning that almost no one noticed. You lie in the quiet, your breath rising softly in the dim light around you, and before anything happens, you notice something almost too gentle to describe, a stillness that feels older than sound. A stillness that doesn't belong to the room you're in, but to the planet beneath you. It's faint, subtle enough that you might think you imagined it. Yet every satellite orbiting Earth hears it, measures it, feeds it into long chains of algorithms that try to convert that cosmic whisper into something human beings can understand. A hum. A low magnetic murmur wrapped around the globe, since long before the first ocean formed. NASA's Swarm mission listens to this murmur every moment of every day. 3 identical spacecraft flying in formation, tracing invisible lines of force that rise from Earth's core and stretch outward into space like threads of soft blue fire. They measure how strong the magnetic field is, how smooth its curves are, how steady its rhythm feels. Because this rhythm is the shield that shelters you from storms you'll never see. You breathe in again, noticing how calm the air feels. Nothing in your room tells you that 150 million kilometers away, the sun is constantly throwing rivers of charged particles in your direction. Nothing tells you that without this magnetic cocoon, the particles would slice through the atmosphere, strip oxygen from the sky, and paint the ground with radiation that no life could survive. But the shield holds, and you stay safe, without ever realizing how much danger is kept at bay. A small awareness begins settling into you. That the world is quieter than it looks, that the most important things working to protect you never make any sound. This is the kind of quiet scientists trust, a quiet that means the field is stable, the magnetosphere is wide, the electric currents flowing through the ionosphere follow their usual patterns. A quiet that tells you Earth is resting in the way a living creature rests, breathing deeply, holding the atmosphere in place. You imagine placing your hand on the ground, feeling nothing more than the coolness of stone or soil. Yet thousands of kilometers beneath you, molten iron swirls in slow, bright loops, creating the magnetic heartbeat Swarm listens to. It's strange to think of the planet as something that can hum, but it does. And tonight the hum feels steady, like a soft reassurance. Your eyes close for a moment. You sense the comfort in that steadiness, the way it wraps around your thoughts. It feels like the calm before sleep, the calm before memory fades into drifting images. Yet somewhere far above the atmosphere, the instruments watching Earth notice something else. Something so delicate it resembles a change in mood rather than a shift in physics. It begins where space stops behaving like emptiness. Out near the region where solar wind flows past Earth's orbit, the magnetic field usually stretches into a long tail. Normally, it sways gently in the cosmic breeze shaped by the sun's breath, as naturally as seaweed drifting underwater. But tonight, the tail seems tighter, as though the breeze has thinned or something has brushed against it from outside. You wouldn't feel it on your skin. You wouldn't hear it as a sound. But deep in the magnetosphere near the region called the plasma sheet, an electric tension stirs. The satellites monitoring it record a minor deviation. NASA labels it non-periodic perturbation, a phrase that means nothing dramatic, nothing dangerous, nothing urgent. Just a flicker in the data, a footstep in a hallway where no one is supposed to walk. Your thoughts drift with it. You wonder how many of Earth's secrets begin as flickers like this. Tiny changes no one notices at first, changes so small they slip beneath the threshold of human concern. There's something beautiful about how fragile and how resilient this planet is. How a change in solar wind density can travel millions of kilometers, touch the magnetosphere with the gentleness of a fingertip, and still create ripples strong enough to echo through the upper atmosphere. The air around you still feels ordinary, yet high above electrons in the radiation belts drift slightly faster than expected. It's the kind of shift NOAA's GOES satellites record without alarm tagging the data with soft blue markers that only specialists know how to read. To you, it feels like a distant pulse, like the Earth exhaling in a slightly different rhythm. You stay with that feeling, letting it settle across your senses. Nothing frightening, nothing urgent, nothing even unusual enough to wake a sleeping bird. Just a subtle reminder that Earth is part of a larger system, a system that stretches from the core of your planet to the far edges of the solar system, where dust from interstellar space drifts like smoke. In that drifting dust lies the beginning of a story you haven't reached yet. A story that started long before you were born, long before Earth had continents shaped the way they are now. A story carried by a traveler no one fully understands. But the night stays soft for now. You feel the room around you growing still, as if the world is leaning closer to listen. The magnetic hum feels unchanged, yet your intuition senses something shifting in the background, like a faint tremor of anticipation. Not fear, not danger, just change. You imagine being above the planet, floating in the vacuum where no sound travels. From that vantage point, Earth glows. Bands of aurora stretch across the poles like green silk. Each line and curve is drawn by particles from the sun, falling into Earth's magnetic field. They paint their light across the sky exactly as they have for millions of years. But tonight the aurora looks different, only by the smallest margin so slight that if you blinked you'd miss it. A thin filament of light extends lower than usual, dipping into a latitude where auroras rarely wander. It doesn't stay. It rises back up, like a wave receding after touching shore a little too far. Somewhere in the ESA control center, someone will notice the anomaly in the morning. For now, it's nothing more than a passing shimmer. You breathe in again. The air feels unchanged, yet your mind holds the echo of that shimmer, as if it brushed against your thoughts. Earth senses these things long before humans recognize them. The planet feels the tension in solar wind, the way an animal feels an approaching storm, not as a threat, but as a shift in its surroundings. Your awareness floats with that shift. You feel the boundary between calm and curiosity grow thin, almost transparent. Every scientific instrument watching Earth, from magnetometers to ionospheric probes, detects a quiet imbalance settling across the field lines. Not enough to raise alarms, not enough to show up on news broadcasts, just enough to whisper that something out there has changed direction. Your heartbeat matches the quiet rhythm of that whisper. A question forms without words, a question that feels older than language. What touched the field? There's no answer yet. Only the sense that Earth has noticed something traveling through the solar system, something that alters the magnetic currents the way a fingertip alters the surface of still water. You lie there as if suspended between the hum of the planet and the silence of space. The two states merge, blending into a calm that feels both intimate and infinite. You sense the story gathering itself around you, the quiet beginning of something vast. And somewhere far beyond the magnetosphere, beyond the orbit of Mars, beyond the soft glow of zodiacal light, a faint object drifts through the darkness. Its path carries a kind of weight, a gravitational nudge so subtle no sensor has fully captured it, yet strong enough to unsettle dust stone and frozen debris scattered across the outer solar system. You don't see it yet. You only feel the space around you preparing for its presence, as though the universe itself is inhaling. The hum beneath you continues steady and calm, but the next breath you take carries a new awareness, a sensation that the quiet is beginning to fold open, revealing the first hints of motion stirring far away. A motion traced by a visitor that should not exist, and the feeling that Earth in its ancient magnetic heartbeat has already sensed what is coming long before you do. The feeling lingers in your chest, as though the air around you has learned a new rhythm, one that comes from a place far beyond any horizon you've ever known. You picture the faint object drifting through the dark so far from Earth that even the sun's warmth reaches it with the softness of a faded memory. Yet its presence somehow has already arrived here, folded into the magnetic hum beneath you. No file in human archives contains its history. No map shows its origin. It moves without belonging to any family of comets, asteroids, or relics shaped by the early solar system. That absence alone feels impossible. Everything in the solar system has a story rooted in ancient collisions, slow accretions, or migrations across billions of years. But this object, the one scientist named 3IATLAS, carries none of those fingerprints. You imagine floating beside it, surrounded by a darkness so clear it feels like glass. There is no engine, no plume of dust trailing behind, no familiar spin that objects usually gain as they dance around the sun. It simply moves quietly, steadily through the vacuum, guided by something that doesn't fit the equations that usually describe the motions of wandering bodies. Astronomers describe its path as weakly constrained, a phrase that rarely shows up in their language unless something refuses to fit into any existing model. You feel a slight unease mixed with curiosity, the kind of emotion that rises when your mind senses a puzzle it cannot yet solve. Not fear, just the awareness that something new is entering the boundaries of what humans understand. Long before 3IATLAS approaches any planet, it disturbs the dust around it. Dust may seem insignificant, but in space, it behaves like a memory system. Tiny grains trap electrical charge, respond to magnetic shifts, and drift in patterns that reveal invisible structures. As 3IATLAS passes through regions where interstellar dust has been drifting for millions of years, the grains move in ways that satellites later interpret as faint anomalies in background radiation. You imagine touching one of those grains no larger than a speck of pollen. It holds stories from distant stars, records from supernova shockwaves, and traces of cosmic rays that have traveled longer than any human civilization has existed. Dust older than the planets themselves. Dust disturbed by an object that should have slipped through space unnoticed. As the object continues its journey, the sun's light touches its surface. It reflects less light than expected, almost as if the material absorbs illumination instead of scattering it. Astronomers call this unusually low reflectivity, suppressed albedo, a trait not typical for icy bodies. Its composition remains a mystery. Spectrometers detect faint signatures of metals, silicates, and compounds altered by high-energy radiation, but nothing consistent enough to form a clear identity. It's like analyzing a voice you've never heard before, one that speaks in frequencies you're not used to listening for. You sense the strangeness in that, how an object so faint could move with such certainty. NASA's automated tracking algorithms attempt to refine its trajectory. Each update brings a new solution, but the solutions drift slightly apart, as though the object is not merely responding to the sun's gravity. The deviations are tiny, almost imperceptible, the sort of differences that could be dismissed as errors in measurement, yet they persist. You picture the scientists studying the data, their screens filled with lines representing orbital paths that refuse to converge. The uncertainty doesn't frighten them, it fascinates them. Space is full of mysteries, and most of them begin with discrepancies like this. Your breath settles deeper, following the mood of the story. It feels like standing at the edge of a forest at night, sensing movement between the trees without seeing the source. The darkness doesn't threaten you. It invites you to listen. In that quiet, something else rises through the solar system, a faint pressure in the charged particles flowing around the sun. MIT plasma physicists call it a disturbance event, a term used when solar wind patterns shift without any solar flare or coronal mass ejection to explain the change. These events are rare, and they ripple outward through space like subtle tides. As the tide moves, the path of a 3IATLAS drifts once more. Satellites monitoring background plasma density detect slight fluctuations, the kind that appear when an object carries its own small electric environment. Not enough to be called a magnetosphere, just enough to change the behavior of dust and charged particles nearby. You feel your curiosity deepen. It's as if the object is wrapped in a quiet field, something soft, something that bends space around it in ways Earth's instruments barely catch. A localized plasma sheath, some scientists whisper. A feature seen around certain comets, but the signature here feels wrong, too stable, too controlled, too intentional. You don't know what to make of that word, but it lingers with a strange weight. Far behind the object, faint trails of dust twist into shapes that don't match the typical arcs of solar radiation pressure. ESA's instruments suggest the grains drift sideways as though nudged by a force that shouldn't exist. In the silence of deep space, a sideways nudge is a loud declaration. The thought presses gently into your mind. Something about this traveler is interacting with its surroundings in a way no natural object has been observed to do. You stay with that thought, letting it settle, letting it bloom into its full shape. The feeling that 3IATLAS is not merely passing through space, but affecting it. As it reaches the outer edge of the solar system's magnetic influence, the solar wind bends around it unusually smoothly. Particles don't scatter as much as expected. They curve around the object, as though following an invisible instruction. When this data reaches the magnetometers, the algorithms blink with uncertainty. You imagine watching the object drift closer, still faint, still quiet. Nothing about it reveals a threat. It doesn't glow or heat up or shed material the way comets do. It travels with the patience of something that has been moving for a very long time. An Earth sensitive to the smallest disturbances in solar wind picks up the earliest hints of its approach. The magnetic hum you felt before deepens by a fraction so small it's almost impossible to describe, but your senses catch it, the way you might notice a subtle shift in the air before rain arrives. NASA's swarm satellites detect a mild irregularity in polar current flow. Not a warning, not even an anomaly worth reporting to the public. Just a whisper in the data, a reminder that the solar system is not as still as it seems. Your mind floats with that whisper, carried along by the awareness that something unfamiliar is moving closer. The universe doesn't rush. It doesn't announce. It reveals itself in the smallest ways, through patterns that don't behave through dust, that drifts wrong through light, that reflects in unfamiliar colors. You feel the beginnings of that revelation now, soft as the moment between inhaling and exhaling, when the world feels suspended in quiet anticipation. The traveler continues inward. Its presence presses gently against the boundary of what Earth can sense, like a fingertip, touching water for the first time. You picture that touch sending ripples through magnetic lines, through plasma streams, through the delicate electric skin of the solar system. A soft realization blooms inside you. The first changes on Earth were not caused by Earth itself. They began with something drifting through the cosmic dark, something that has no past. We can trace no origin, we can confirm. And as it moves closer, the solar system begins to respond quietly, instinctively, like an organism waking from a long, dreamless sleep. Your breath settles again. The quiet deepens. And somewhere across this vast ancient system of planets and dust and light, a small shift begins to echo through paths of orbit that have remained steady for millions of years. An echo that will grow. An echo carried by the undocumented traveler, entering the space where certainty ends and mystery begins. The echo drifts with you, folding itself into your breath, as though it has been waiting for a place to settle. It spreads softly through your awareness, and you begin to sense not just the traveler, but the space around it, a vast ocean of dust, suspended between planets older than the planets themselves, drifting in slow, luminous waves. You picture the dust the way astronomers describe it, not as debris or forgotten remnants, but as the quiet archive of the solar system. Each grain carries thousands of layers, chemical memories, shaped by starlight, carved by plasma storms, rearranged by the faint push of radiation that has traveled across billions of miles. Some grains contain carbon that formed in the dying breath of ancient stars. Some contain metallic fragments altered by cosmic rays that have been wandering since before Earth existed. Each speck is a story. You imagine holding one, though it is far too small for fingers to grasp. A grain that drifted through interstellar darkness long before the sun ignited. You picture it floating in front of you, catching the faintest whisper of sunlight in its rough crystalline edges, as though it carries a secret from another age. In the silence of deep space, these grains respond to every force, gravity, heat, radiation, magnetism. They behave like petals caught in a wind you cannot see. So, when 3IATLAS moves through the dust fields, the behavior of those grains reveals the presence before any telescope can. The dust bends, not dramatically, not violently, but with a strange coherence. It curves around the traveler as though following a contour that shouldn't exist, a subtle pathway carved by something that guides rather than pushes. In ESA's data, scientists notice the slightest shifts in zodiacal light, the faint glow created when sunlight scatters off interplanetary dust. The glow dims in, places it shouldn't brightens, and curves that don't match the usual geometry of the sun's illumination. It's almost as if the dust is leaning away from 3IATLAS, as though the traveler carries a field of its own. Your breath steadies as you picture it, a quiet object wrapped in a thin invisible veil, moving through the dust, the way a ship moves through fog, not disturbing it violently, but parting it gently, creating pathways that close slowly behind it. That veil fascinates scientists. Some suspect electrostatic charging dust grains aligning with a faint electric field. Others consider the possibility of a plasma envelope something similar to what forms around certain comets when exposed to solar wind. But the traveler is still too far from the sun for such an envelope to form naturally. You sense something in that contradiction? Not fear, not alarm, just the subtle awareness that the universe often communicates through contradictions first. The dust keeps shifting. NASA's IR instruments detect slight fluctuations in thermal emission, not enough to signal danger, but enough to suggest the grains are warming unevenly. Heat should disperse smoothly through the dust field. It rarely chooses direction. Yet here warmth gathers along a thin arc trailing behind the traveler, as though the object leaves a line of rearranged particles in its wake. You picture it like a brushstroke of heat across the dark canvas of space. Even in stillness, the dust reacts. Some grains drift closer to one another, forming small temporary chains of electrostatic attraction. Others spiral away as if nudged by a charge too faint to measure directly. You feel the softness of that motion, a kind of cosmic exhale, dust moving in synchrony with something it should not understand. Your awareness drifts with it, following the patterns the way you might follow the slow sway of grass in a gentle breeze. A quiet beauty rises from these movements, rhythmic, ancient, weightless. And in this rhythm, the solar system begins to notice. The sun feels it first, though. Feels is only a metaphor for the way plasma responds to even the smallest disturbance in charged particles. Solar wind density shifts imperceptibly, and the magnetic field near the heliospheric boundary warps as if pressed by an unseen palm. Monitors detect subtle increases in electron flux. Not an event, not a warning, just a sign that the charged particles flowing from the sun are responding to something passing through the quiet. You sense the sun's awareness, like the deep rumble of a sleeping giant, adjusting its breath. Nothing sudden, nothing threatening. But something has brushed against the invisible architecture that holds the solar system together, the architecture sculpted by the sun's magnetism over billions of years. In the dust light starts to behave differently. Scattering angles widen as though the grains turn ever so slightly to face the traveler. Astronomers call the effect phase function alteration, but you feel it more simply as if the dust knows. It knows something foreign has entered a space that rarely hosts visitors. You imagine floating there, watching the dust shift in shimmering arcs around a faint object you can barely see. The silence feels endless, yet filled with meaning. The dust moves as though breathing with the traveler's presence, reacting to it, tracing the shape of its field. Those reactions travel outward, rippling through regions of dust that have lain untouched for centuries. Each ripple distorts the faint paths of particles drifting near the boundary between planetary influence and interstellar environment. Your thoughts drift with those ripples, feeling them spread gentle waves crossing a dark sea that has slept for ages. You sense how vast the story is becoming. The traveler is not merely passing through. Its presence is rewriting the subtle choreography of the system. An Earth far away yet deeply connected through the magnetic web that ties every planet to the solar wind begins to pick up those ripples. The magnetic hum beneath you shifts, not loudly, not sharply, but with the softness of a sigh. Swarm sensors detect small irregularities in field line curvature, so small they fall below public thresholds. Yet they are there, recorded in columns of silent numbers. You feel as though the planet is listening. Dust altered by an unfamiliar field, solar wind bending around a shape that refuses categorization. Faint signatures rippling through the plasma network. These threads weave into a tapestry that surrounds you, even if you cannot see it. Your breath slows as you realize something delicate. Earth is responding even before the traveler enters the inner solar system. A subtle electric shift touches the ionosphere. A tiny variation in electron density hovers just above polar latitudes. Not a disturbance, but a suggestion. A suggestion that the dust, the great archive of interstellar history, has delivered a message by the way it moves, reflects, and redirects light. And the message whispers that the traveler is not drifting aimlessly. It is charting a course. The dust responds to it almost with recognition. Patterns form that resemble resonance, as though the grains follow a rhythm they haven't felt in millions of years. You feel that rhythm echo through you, slow and steady, like a memory touching the edge of your mind. A memory you didn't know you carried. It glides through you with the softness of falling ash, settling in your awareness, like a truth waiting to take shape. The dust remembers. The dust reacts. The dust reveals the presence of something the solar system hasn't hosted before. And as the grains drift aside in graceful, shimmering patterns, you sense that the traveler, quiet, faint, and undocumented, has begun to write its presence into the space between worlds. The writing has only begun. The presence being written into the space between worlds lingers with you, trailing along the edges of your awareness like a soft vibration that hasn't yet found its full resonance. It feels almost shy, almost unfinished, like the opening line of a story that hasn't decided what shape it wants to take. Yet the solar system begins responding before the writing is complete. Far from Earth in the vast quiet between Mars and Jupiter, the dust field thickens into a hazy golden river. Here countless rocks drift, some small enough to fit in your hand, some the size of mountains. The region looks still from afar, but within it everything is barely moving, locked in slow, ancient orbits shaped by the sun's gravity. You picture this region the way astronomers describe it, a place where time seems to hold its breath. Every stone has been circling the sun for eons, following paths defined by delicate balances. Tiny forces, light, pressure, gravitational resonances, gentle collisions, shape every wandering grain and every drifting boulder. And tonight, without warning, some of those forces change. The shift begins too softly for human senses. It arrives in ways only instruments notice, the faintest change in the trajectories of small metallic fragments, the slightest deviation in the thermal signatures of carbon-rich rocks, the smooth whisper-like tension moving through the plasma between scattered objects. These are not events. They are not explosions or impacts or shattering pieces of rock. They are small, almost shy disturbances, the kind that only grow meaningful when seen together. You imagine drifting inside the belt, letting the river of stones move past you in slow motion. The silence feels thick enough to touch. Somewhere in that silence, a pebble-sized piece of rock shifts course by a fraction of a degree, so small that a camera wouldn't catch it yet, so precise that NASA's deep space radar marks it as an outlier. The rock drifts closer to another, not by force, but as if nudged. The dust between them swirls in a faint spiral. The motion feels coordinated, guided by something that doesn't belong to this place. That something is approaching. The disturbance deepens in ways numbers can track, but humans experience with intuition. It feels like a pulse moving through ancient stone, a pulse that doesn't originate from the sun or planets. No AA models describe a phenomenon called localized plasma crest deformation, a delicate change in the alignment of charged particles caused by an external object passing through a region of uneven dust distribution. In everyday language, it means something is bending the invisible pathways that plasma normally follows. You feel that bending inside yourself, as if the story unfolding in front of you is subtly reshaping the structure of your thoughts, the way a soft gust might shift the direction of smoke. Within the asteroid belt, the pulse grows stronger. A dark metallic fragment, one that has been orbiting the sun for perhaps 3 billion years, tilts ever so slightly, rotating faster than it should. Its surface catches sunlight in a new angle, spinning a thin line of reflected brightness that sweeps across nearby rocks like the arc of a quiet beacon. That line of light brushes against a cluster of smaller stones. Their motion changes, not dramatically, not alarmingly, just enough to reveal that something nearby is affecting their stability. You sense that something even before the instruments do. You feel it in the way the dust from Part 3 remembers patterns, how dust reacts first, how dust behaves like the solar system's early warning system. Now the stones react. 1,000 small objects shift by fractions of distances, too tiny to see but too consistent to dismiss. Those tiny shifts create new paths, new interactions, new tensions that ripple through the belt like faint aftershocks. One of those paths carries a fragment a few meters across toward another cluster. Collision models from NASA predict such interactions with exquisite precision. But this movement belongs to none of the predictions. Its deviation falls outside the usual margin of stochastic drift. The two rocks drift closer. Their edges scrape. A muted shimmer of dust rises around them, glowing briefly as sunlight scatters through the disturbed grains. Still no sound, still no violence. Just a small rearrangement of matter in a place where matter rarely rearranges itself without a clear reason. You watch the dust rise, swirling through the thin sunlight. Each grain reflects the story of the disturbance, the same signature that began with the traveler drifting through outer space. The dust between the stones brightens for a heartbeat longer than expected. A sign of electrostatic charging, a sign of influence. And the solar system listens. This moment is small yet meaningful, a gentle imbalance in a region that thrives on balance. NASA's automated systems detect several low-magnitude orbital anomalies. They categorize them without urgency, small, harmless, interesting, only to those who love studying microdynamics. But when viewed together, those anomalies form a pattern. You feel the pattern before your mind shapes it into meaning, a pattern of objects shifting toward instability, a pattern that resembles early tremors before something larger begins. Your breath deepens. The thought settles into you like a quiet realization that the disturbance here is not isolated. It is the first link in a chain connecting dust-stone, plasma, and magnetism. A chain beginning with the traveler. The rocks continue shifting. A few larger ones drift ever so slightly apart, as though the space between them is expanding. Others move closer, colliding softly, releasing small clouds of micro-debris. These micro-debris clouds scatter light in shimmering fans, wide, delicate, drifting like wings made of powder. Astronomers call these fans diffuse ejecta patterns. They appear around objects affected by faint, persistent forces, not enough to break them, but enough to rearrange the space around them. You imagine floating through one of those clouds, dust brushing past you, with the gentleness of falling snow. Each particle carries the imprint of the disturbance, the signature of a field that shouldn't exist, yet moves with purpose. The traveler hasn't entered the belt. Its presence alone is enough to start the reshaping. Your awareness follows the disturbance outward, tracing the subtle tension through the stones. A quiet chain reaction begins forming, not chaotic, not magnificent, but profound in the way it hints at the traveler's influence. A small object changes course farther out. Its motion bends toward a different cluster. The cluster tightens. A thin film of dust moves into a new alignment. Electrons drift into unusual spirals. The plasma between rocks grows slightly hotter. These are the earliest signs of destabilization, not dangerous yet, but meaningful to those who listen to the deep language of space. And you find yourself listening with a clarity that feels ancient. The disturbance is not violent. It is not destructive. It is a whisper strong enough to bend the quiet structure of the asteroid belt. Earth cannot see the rocks shifting, cannot feel dust brightening, cannot hear plasma humming differently, but it senses the pattern through the same magnetic intuition that responded in Part 1. A slight increase in magnetospheric curvature, a delicate rearrangement of field-aligned currents, a faint pause in the stability of the polar cap, all tiny, all quiet, all preparing the solar system for what comes as the traveler moves closer, carrying the unseen story that began in the dust and blooms now in shifting stone. The disturbance continues to spread, from one cluster to another, from small grains to heavy rocks, from the silence of ancient orbits to the awareness of planets bound in their gravitational dance. You feel the change growing like a pulse searching for rhythm, like a storm practicing its first breath, like the prelude to something the solar system has not felt in millions of years. And somewhere behind the disturbance, still faint, still quiet, still undocumented, the traveler approaches the place where dust and stone begin to awaken. The awakening in the dust lingers in your mind, a soft shimmer expanding through the asteroid belt, like a breath slowly filling a vast, ancient lung. Each rock that shifts carries the echo a little farther, and you feel that echo spreading through the stones, not as chaos, but as recognition. The traveler draws nearer. Its presence settles into the belt, the way moonlight settles over still water, quiet, unwavering, strangely deliberate. You sense how the fabric of the belt seems to lean toward it, as though the stones have begun listening after ages of silence. The listening becomes visible. A single metallic shard, no larger than a small house forged by forgotten collisions, when the solar system was young, drifts through a cloud of dust that has been undisturbed for centuries. The dust parts around it in a smooth, spiraling pattern, the kind of motion plasma physicists observe in simulations of objects wrapped in weak, coherent fields. You feel the hesitation in the dust, as if the grains themselves are wondering whether to yield or resist. They yield. Sunlight passes through the dust and glitters across the shard's surface, revealing new angles of light angles that shouldn't exist in a region where everything normally reflects with predictable dullness. This small brightening spreads into the stones around it, not as illumination, but as motion. A rock hundreds of meters away tilts by an angle too small for the human eye, yet large enough for JPL's radar systems to log it as unexpected microvector shift. A second rock shifts in the opposite direction. The two motions respond to each other like dancers who have not danced in millennia, but suddenly remember the first steps. You hold that image inside you, feeling its weight, its strangeness, its inevitability. A whispering current seems to glide between the rocks, connecting them, aligning them with a force that does not belong to ordinary physics of the belt. This current carries the signature of the traveler, the field that made dust spiral gracefully behind it in Part 3, now reaching into the heavier bodies resting deeper within the belt. The stones begin to react, softly, subtly, but undeniably. NASA's thermal infrared sensors detect faint heat pulses radiating from clusters that have not warmed in millions of years, dust warmed by electrostatic rearrangement, fragments vibrating microscopically as they absorb stray energy drifting through the belt. You feel this warmth through the narrative like brushing your hand near an ember that has only just begun to glow. Another rock turns. Its rotation is small, yet it creates a new angle of gravitational pull on a pebble floating several kilometers away. The pebble drifts from its resting trajectory. Its new path intersects the path of another drifting fragment. A tiny collision follows so gentle it barely counts as a touch. Yet the dust scattering from that touch forms bright patterns that linger longer than physics predicts. ESA analysts would call this enhanced scattering persistence, a phenomenon seen when grains align with an external field. But you feel it simply as a pause in time, the universe holding its breath for a moment too long. These motions begin repeating across the belt, not uniformly, not wildly, just in pockets regions where the traveler's presence brushes the space between stones. You imagine floating in one of those pockets. Rocks the size of towers move with slow, deliberate confidence, as though responding to a signal too soft for human ears. Dust swirls in patterns that resemble blooming flowers, petals made of silicate grains opening and closing with invisible tides. The patterns expand outward and the belt begins to shift in ways that even instruments struggle to interpret. A stone a kilometer wide subtly changes its orientation, and that shift alters the motion of dozens of smaller objects nearby. Each change becomes a seed that spreads further change, tiny adjustments, propagating through a field that has been stable since the birth of the planets. This is the beginning of a chain reaction, not created by force, but by resonance. You feel that resonance hum against your skin, a quiet vibration that makes the story feel deeper, more alive. Astronomers have seen such resonances before, but never without a clear source. Jupiter often induces waves through its gravitational pull. Solar storms occasionally send pressure pulses that shift plasma behavior, but nothing in current space weather models explains this synchronized trembling. The signature matches nothing the Sun is producing, nothing from Jupiter's domain, nothing from the usual perturbations of the outer planets. It matches only the traveler. Its path crosses near zones of gravitational stability regions, where the pull of Jupiter, Mars, and the Sun hold stones in place like beads balanced on taut strings. These zones are delicate. A disturbance here doesn't need to push. It only needs to whisper. The traveler whispers. Stones begin to drift from the strings. Not far, just enough to begin a slow migration. NASA calls these non-linear deviation cascades, but you feel them as quiet awakenings like old giants stretching after a long rest. One rock wakes another. That one wakes a third. Small fragments begin to congregate along faint curves the traveler leaves in its wake. These curves resemble magnetic contour lines, maps of a force altering the space between particles. You can almost see the map taking shape around you, a soft schematic, drawn not in ink, but in motion. And as motion grows, the belt begins creating its own energy. Tiny impacts produce flashes weaker than lightning, yet bright enough for instruments to capture them as ultraviolet spikes. These spikes flicker across regions where impacts rarely occur. You feel those flashes like small sparks in the distance, tiny reminders that something in the belt is waking up with new intention. Dust clouds expand and collapse with rhythmic grace. Rocks rotate in slow spirals guided by invisible threads. Fragments travel along arcs that resemble currents in a deep ocean. And beneath it all, you sense the growing tension, a pressure building, not through force but through accumulation. Accumulated motion, accumulated resonance, accumulated awareness. The solar system feels it, Earth feels it, even if humans do not yet know why. Swarm detects a minor tightening of the magnetic field at high latitudes. GOES measures a soft rise in background electron energy. Nothing alarming, nothing dangerous, just a whisper, traveling ahead of the disturbance carried on the same invisible thread connecting dust-stone plasma and magnetism. You follow that thread as it winds through the belt, touching stone after stone, awakening structures older than any planet. A single larger object, its surface striped with iron and carbon, spins into a new orientation that exposes a long hidden crater to the sun. The crater's floor glints faintly as buried dust, lifts in a shimmering plume. The plume arcs across space in a graceful feathered trail. It floats past you so softly that it feels like being surrounded by glowing snow. Each grain reflects the signature of the traveler, the faint field that shapes the dust into swirling patterns. The field moves through you with quiet insistence, a feeling that something subtle has begun aligning the solar system with a rhythm it once knew, or perhaps never knew at all. The rocks are no longer simply drifting. They are learning to move. And as the awakening deepens, the traveler continues its approach, drawing the belt into the first stages of a pattern that will soon reach far beyond dust and stone, touching the magnetic breath of every world that orbits the sun. The motion in the belt continues long after the traveler has passed the first threshold, as though the stones themselves have rediscovered a rhythm they'd forgotten across uncounted ages. Their shifting becomes the first breath of something larger, a slow exhale that spreads outward into the thin charged wind, drifting through the solar system. You feel that exhale long before Earth, or any instrument does. It moves not through matter, but through the invisible pathways carved by electricity and magnetism threads, woven through the solar system, like the veins of a vast living organism. The wave begins softly, a faint tightening in the plasma that fills the spaces between planets, a gentle compression of charged particles that drift with the solar wind. The kind of shift that doesn't bend trajectories yet, but promises that it could. You picture plasma the way physicists do not, as gas, but as an ocean of wandering ions and electrons, restless and sensitive forever. Listening to gravity to magnetic pressure, to disturbances too delicate for solid stones to register. The belt sends its whisper into that ocean. The whisper travels far. Each particle shifts slightly as if turning to face the direction from which the disturbance comes. A collective motion too subtle for the eye, yet strong enough for MIT's solar wind simulations to later mark it as unusual global coherence. The coherence grows. Solar wind that usually behaves like a free-flowing river begins pulling into gentle curves, bending along faint lines of pressure created by the traveler's passing field. It is not a force that pushes. It is a pattern that everything else chooses to follow. You sense that pattern taking form, a path of influence stretching across millions of kilometers. In this curved wind, tiny charged grains of dust accelerate unevenly. Some slow down, some drift faster. Others spiral in graceful arcs drawn into synchronized motion by the faint signature the traveler leaves behind. You watch the arcs stretch into ribbons of drifting particles, their shapes lengthening as the quiet wave moves through them. These ribbons become guides pointing the way the traveler has gone, pointing to where the wave will travel next. The next place is the solar wind itself. And NOAA's data will later show that the wind thickens slightly, a density shift, without any solar flare, a rise in pressure without any eruption from the sun. The wave carries no heat, no light, only structure. A structure that moves through the wind with the softness of breath across water. You feel its softness, the way it glides, the way it folds into the magnetic fabric, stretched between the planets. Earth has its own stretch of that fabric, a region where solar wind meets the outer edge of the magnetosphere. A fragile, shimmering boundary scientists call the bow shock, because it curves ahead of the planet like the front of a ship parting waves. The wave reaches that boundary. The encounter is gentle, a soft press, a shift in the angle of the bow, shock so slight that NASA's magnetopause models record it only as a minor adjustment. Instruments see a tiny change in magnetic pressure, Satellites notice electrons drifting a little differently, but you feel it as something deeper, a change in the planet's breathing. The magnetic field responds with a slow ripple. A ripple so delicate that birds and animals would never sense it, yet precise enough for Swarm to detect faint irregularities in its curves. The field trembles. Not a warning tremble, more like the moment a sleeping creature adjusts itself on soft ground, shifting weight from one side to the other. You sense the shift through your body as though the very ground beneath you has taken a quieter, deeper breath. In the upper atmosphere, small electric currents adjust themselves. They realign not chaotically, but in smooth patterns drawn by the wave moving through the ionosphere. These patterns resemble the early stages of auroras, delicate vertical ripples of charged particles preparing for motion. But tonight no aurora appears, only the potential for one. A silent preparation. This preparation spreads across the ionosphere, smoothing some regions, stretching others, creating channels where charged particles travel with slightly more ease. These channels stretch toward the poles. You imagine them like faint rivers of electricity flowing unseen across the sky, rivers Earth has used for millions of years to guide energy from the sun toward the night. Tonight the rivers feel wider. The widening is small, gentle enough to be mistaken for breathing, yet meaningful enough that NOAA's auroral forecast models begin producing soft anomalies curves that predict auroras forming farther from the poles than they should. You feel the planet take note of those curves as though Earth itself wonders what brushed against its magnetic skin. The quiet wave continues. It sinks deeper past the ionosphere toward the region where Earth's rotation and magnetic pressure weave together. This region behaves like a buffer, absorbing energy, slowly releasing it, slower still. Most disturbances die here, but not this one. This one glides through. Not by force, but by resonance, matching the rhythm of Earth's tides, aligning with the slow oscillations of magnetic drift, sliding between frequencies that rarely find harmony. You sense the harmony forming, a low vibration settling into the planet's field. A vibration that feels old, as if Earth has felt it before, long ago, in a time before continents broke apart, before the moon settled into its orbit, before the oceans cooled. The vibration travels into Earth's crust, a whisper moving through stone. It is far too gentle to cause movement, far too soft to trigger quake or tremor. Yet it stirs existing tensions, the quiet pressure accumulated along faults that have been holding stress for decades, not triggering, just reminding the stone it is capable of motion. USGS instruments detect no quakes, only subtle microshifts in crustal electromagnetic fields, variations so small they exist in the noise floor of the data. But you feel them. You feel them the way you feel the settling of a house at night, the way a floorboard expands or contracts with temperature, a reminder that nothing solid is truly still. The quiet wave moves on. It travels back upward through the atmosphere, touching clouds with the faintest charge, altering how water molecules cling to dust. Clouds drift lower in some regions, higher in others, barely noticeable to anyone on the ground. Yet inside, weather models these deviations ignite new trajectories. The jet stream bends. Not far, not violently, just subtly enough to shift future winds along paths no meteorologist predicted for this week. This shift will take days to matter, but the seed has been planted. The wave continues its journey, sliding along magnetic lines that stretch across the night side of Earth, flowing back toward the solar system's heart, connecting with the wind that brought it. Behind it, the world feels slightly changed, not frightened, not shaken, but aware. Aware that something quiet and unusual has passed through the system. Aware that dust is moving, stone is listening, and magnetism is learning a new rhythm. The traveler remains far from Earth, still hidden behind veils of dust and shifting plasma. Yet its influence already touches the planet, carried through the whispering wave that traveled ahead of it. You feel the story deepening around you, not loud, not urgent, but inevitable. The way a tide rises, the way dawn forms behind a horizon, still drenched in night. And somewhere beyond Mars, the traveler glides forward, moving through the dark, with a purpose that no equation has yet captured, drawing the next wave behind it, a wave that will no longer be quiet. The second wave forms slowly, yet you feel it long before any measurement reaches a scientist's screen. It moves like a deep breath, drawn through the solar system, pulling tension from the belt into the empty spaces between worlds. The faint nudges that once touched only dust and light fragments begin to press against heavier bodies, the ones forged in the early fires of planetary creation, the ones containing iron and nickel cores cooled over billions of years. These bodies have weight, they have memory, and they listen differently. You sense their listening begin in the half-shadow of the belt, where sunlight reaches only enough to give the stones a dull metallic glow. A large fragment rests there, scarred by ancient collisions, its surface streaked with long veins of iron, worn smooth by time. It has drifted in the same wide circle for an age so long that even the planets have changed positions countless times since its last collision. But tonight the fragment shifts. It happens quietly, a change in angular momentum so small a camera could never capture it. Yet the shift is real, and it deepens with the slow patience characteristic of bodies too massive to hurry. You feel that patience. You feel how the stone accepts the influence passing through the belt, the field that the traveler has woven behind it like a trail of invisible silk. This influence presses against the iron-veined surface, not an impact, not a shove, more like the weight of a fingertip resting on metal warmed by starlight. The fragment tilts, only by a breath, but a breath in space can change everything. A nearby cluster reacts, smaller bodies adjusting to the new gravitational lines drawn by the fragment's altered rotation. Not by choice, but by the subtle mathematics that binds them all into a system older than memory. The cluster's motion spreads outward, bending the paths of various metallic objects into arcs they have not traced before. One of those arcs leads a smaller fragment into a region of the belt, where gravitational balances are fragile, the kind of region NASA calls metastable corridors paths, that can collapse into new trajectories if disturbed. The fragment crosses that corridor. As it does, sunlight hits its surface in a way it hasn't in centuries, and the metal flashes faintly, a single glint drifting through the dark. You sense the moment that glint appears as if the solar system itself is lifting its head in acknowledgement. A flash like that is nothing to most eyes. But to a world that listens through magnetism and tidal pressure, the flash is a signal that one of the heavy stones has shifted far enough to influence others. That influence grows. Another fragment, larger and denser, tilts its orbit slightly as the wave brushes past. Its iron-rich body reacts to the faint electric field that trails behind the traveler, aligning with it in a pattern MIT researchers describe as weak field rotational coupling. The rock begins to spin faster, faster still. Not dangerously, but with enough new velocity to alter its course over time. Its path no longer matches the orbital predictions stored in NASA's databases. A quiet deviation begins, small, precise, persistent. You can almost imagine watching it drift, its surface shimmering with iron dust that breaks loose from centuries of stillness. The dust forms a thin cloud around it, swirling like breath in cold air. The swirl carries the signature of the traveler. This signature continues spreading until it reaches yet another metallic body, a spear-shaped fragment born from a collision that occurred when Earth itself was young. Its long edges catch solar radiation unevenly, making it more responsive to small changes in pressure. Tonight, the pressure is not from the sun, it is from the wave. The fragment rotates gently. Its pointed end dips downward. A slow curve forms. The curve deepens. You sense gravity beginning to draw it in a new direction, not a fall, but the beginning of one. This is the moment the first metal begins to leave the belt. It does not leap, it drifts, soft as a leaf drifting across a pond. Yet the drift is enough to pull the fragment away from the balanced gravitational pockets it has slept in for ages. Its new path glides past a smaller rock. The two objects exchange momentum through a near kiss in vacuum. The smaller one jolts sideways, picking up a speed its mass rarely allows. The speed becomes its new identity. It cuts through the dust with a quiet confidence, its path curving gently downward into the inner solar system. A rogue meteor in its earliest form, still slow, still harmless, yet no longer tethered to the belt. You feel the moment it becomes unbound, a tiny break in the belt structure, a bead sliding away from the thread that once held it in place. And behind it, other beads begin to tremble. Fragment after fragment tries to hold its position in the wake of the wave, but influence is contagious in a system built on balance. When one stone shifts, others feel the pull. When one object leaves those around, it must adjust to fill the empty space. Adjustments become motion. Motion becomes drift. Drift becomes instability. The solar system watches all of this silently. There is no explosion, no eruption of dust, no violent scattering. Only the soft rearrangement of metal and stone in patterns shaped by the approaching traveler's field. Earth begins to sense these changes too. A slight increase in micrometeoroid detections at the outer edge of its orbital path. A rise in faint impacts on long-range detectors placed on-board deep space probes. A subtle uptick in plasma turbulence recorded by ESA's solar orbiter. Tiny signals that suggest new objects are entering regions where old paths rarely lead. You feel these signals not as data, but as moods shifting across the sky. Like the air before a storm. Like the hush before a flock of birds suddenly changes direction as one. Rogue meteors do not appear all at once. They begin as whispers, as fragments finding freedom in the quiet shape of a wave. The ones that escape now move slowly, far slower than the dramatic streaks humans picture when they imagine meteors. But speed is a matter of time. They will gather it as they fall closer to the sun. The belt continues awakening. More metallic cores shift. More dust clouds spiral apart. More clusters loosen their grip on stones they have held for geologic epochs. This is the beginning of a cascade not loud, not catastrophic, but far-reaching. A cascade that begins with one piece of metal falling and will soon spread across the vast corridor between Mars and Jupiter, echoing through the spaces between planets, shaping the architecture of orbits with a precision that no human design could imitate. You feel the cascade settling into place, a quiet pattern forming beneath everything you've known. A pattern that will carry the rogue stones inward toward the warm regions of the solar system, toward the magnetic breath of Earth, toward the storm that has not yet formed. And behind the cascade, moving slowly with the patience of something ancient, the traveler continues its approach, drawing metal dust plasma and gravity into the first movements of a story. The solar system has not lived in millions of years. The story that has not lived in millions of years begins weaving itself through the space between planets, curling into the faint paths left behind by the rogue fragments drifting free from the belt. Their movement is slow, almost tender, yet the significance behind their drifting grows with each passing moment. You feel that significance settling around you like a soft halo, a presence that deepens with the sense that the solar system itself is beginning to listen. The listening starts where light grows thin in the vast corridor between Mars and the outer edge of Earth's orbit, a region so quiet that even the sun feels distant. Here the plasma wind flows in long ribbons, neither dense nor fast, but steady, in a way that scientists rely on, for predictions steady in a way that comforts the rhythms of planetary motion. Tonight that steadiness softens. A subtle thinning appears in one ribbon of the solar wind, a thinning that should not exist when the sun is calm. NOAA's models will later record it as a small irregularity, one that carries no warning label, no alert, just a note in the data-localized wind deficit. You feel that deficit like an exhale held too long. As the solar wind thins, the rogue fragment drifting ahead begins to accelerate, not dramatically, but with a precision that makes you feel the shift in your bones. The fragment's iron core responds to the change in charge particles around it, gaining speed the way a leaf gains movement when wind flows more freely. The movement looks natural, it feels natural, yet the timing is too perfect to be coincidence. The second fragment behind it follows the same path, its trajectory bending gently toward the thinning region, as though guided by the wave that has traveled ahead of them. You imagine watching them small bodies gliding through the dark, with a grace they didn't possess, before their motions synchronized like slow dancers turning toward the same music. This music grows louder inside the solar wind. A soft rise in electric tension occurs barely above the background hum, yet enough to cause ESA's probes to mark the region with faint distortions in ion flow. The distortions look like curls in water, disturbed by a single fingertip. That fingertip belongs to the traveler. Its field still lies far beyond direct detection. Yet the patterns it once shaped in the dust now begin to shape the solar wind itself. The wind pulls into curves, creating channels that fragments can slide through effortlessly. You sense how those channels behave not as currents, but as invitations. The fragments accept the invitation. Their speed increases a little more, their paths tightening into elegant arcs that carry them inward, closer to regions where the wind grows warmer, where sunlight gains weight, where magnetic fields wrap around the planets. The solar system notices, not through sight but through pressure. Tiny changes begin in the heliospheric current sheet, the vast rippling surface that spirals outward from the sun, like a cosmic ocean. Scientists call it the ballerina skirt, for the way it sways in slow-motion waves. Tonight, the skirt shifts slightly as though turning its face toward the disturbance traveling through space. You feel the shift like a gentle brush along your thoughts, a reminder that the solar system is a single connected breath, one that changes shape when even small pieces of metal begin falling inward. Earth senses the change too. A faint tightening forms along its magnetic field lines, so small that swarm satellites capture it as nothing more than a curvature irregularity. The irregularity rings like an echo in the upper atmosphere, a soft pulse that moves across the night side of the planet. You feel that pulse beneath your sternum, a quiet thrum, steady and patient. This thrum extends outward, meeting the solar wind, where Earth's magnetic shield presses against it. The shield flexes not in fear, but in curiosity. It leans into the wind the way a listener leans toward a whisper created by the fragments moving closer. NASA's long-range detectors, stationed aboard deep space probes, register the slightest rise in high-metal micrometeoroid counts. These increases are measured in particles no larger than grains of sand, yet their patterns betray something greater. They are arriving in filaments, as though following the channels carved by the wave. Filaments rarely form on their own. They form when something guides them. You sense that guidance everywhere now, in the wind and the dust, in the subtle pressure running across magnetic surfaces. It feels like the universe clearing its throat before speaking. Far from Earth, one of the rogue fragments drifts past the orbit of Mars. Its rough surface glows faintly as sunlight strikes it with a sharper angle, exposing pockets of iron that have remained cold for ages. These pockets warm, releasing tiny flickers of charged dust. The dust spirals away. The spiral widens. Its shape curls with a grace identical to the patterns left earlier in the asteroid belt. A sign that the traveler's influence is not weakening. It is becoming the solar system's new language. You feel this language unfolding each motion, telling part of a story, written not with words, but with physics adjusted by something that should not have such reach. The second rogue fragment follows the first. It crosses into a region where Mars's gravity leaves a faint shadow. This gravitational shadow bends paths delicately, and the fragment responds with a shift in speed that causes a trail of dust behind it to brighten. The brightening lasts longer than physics predicts. ESA's photometric readings will later show that the dust carries electrostatic charge not produced by the sun, but by the memory of the traveler's field. The dust remembers. The dust guides, and Earth listens. Its magnetic field stretches slightly outward as though tasting the change in solar wind. A subtle stir appears in the ring current encircling the planet, a sign that the magnetosphere is adjusting to something incoming, something light enough to go unnoticed, but meaningful enough to prepare for. You feel this preparation. It settles around you like the moment before rain touches the ground. A gentleness, a tension, a recognition. The rogue fragments glide deeper into the corridor, leading toward Earth's orbital zone. They are still far, still slow, still harmless. But each one carries the signature of the wave, a quiet instability that will soon turn into something more. A soft realization unfolds within you. The sky listens long before it speaks. And tonight the sky has heard the traveler. Its listening carries through the wind, through the dust, through the paths the fragments follow. It echoes across the magnetic breath of the planet, preparing the atmosphere, stretching currents, holding a new pattern, the way cupped hands hold water just before pouring. Everything feels poised not in fear, but in anticipation. A shift coming closer, gathering purpose, ready to reveal the next movement in a story, woven through dust, metal, wind, and the quiet pulse of an object that should not belong here. The fragments drift onward, carrying the wave's message with them, a message Earth will soon be able to read. The message drifting toward Earth travels without sound, without color, without any trace that the human eye could follow. It moves through charged particles, through dust spirals, through the quiet arcs traced by the rogue fragments as they slip deeper into the inner solar system. You feel the message before Earth does. It settles over your thoughts like a faint vibration, a rhythm that doesn't ask for attention, but refuses to disappear. The vibration reminds you of something familiar, like the soft trembling of a surface when a distant train passes too far to hear, but close enough for the air to remember. Earth's magnetic field remembers too. At first, the remembering feels like nothing more than a slight tightening and narrowing of invisible lines that connect the planet's poles to the solar wind. These lines have stretched across space for billions of years, shaping auroras, guiding radiation, protecting oceans and air. Tonight they pull a little closer together, not enough to alarm, yet enough for Swarm to register a soft, uneven dip in the field's smoothness. You feel the dip as if it moves through your lungs. A gentle shiver, not cold, not sharp, just a quiet reminder that even something as vast as a planet can respond to the faintest touch. In the darkness above the atmosphere, electrons drift along the magnetic field lines with a strange kind of hesitation. They slow in regions where they usually race and speed up, in regions where they normally drift. NOAA's plots will later show the phenomenon as a mild distortion, a twist in the ribbon of the plasma sheet, the sheet that stretches behind Earth like a glowing tail. The twist is small, yet unmistakable. You sense it like the tightening of a thread that connects Earth to something moving in the distance. This tightening pulls the ionosphere into a subtle imbalance. The imbalance reveals itself in the faint flicker of far northern currents, tiny rivers of electricity that shift sideways by less than a kilometer. Barely anything. Yet even that small shift nudges the atmosphere in ways few notice. A thin column of cold air drops deeper than normal. Another column rises too fast. Clouds at high altitude lose a fraction of their symmetry and drift into new shapes. You imagine watching them long silver threads moving across the night as if following a whisper etched into the wind. Yet the true change isn't in the clouds, it is in the ground. Deep beneath the crust, where rocks press against each other under the weight of continents, the electric field changes. It is tiny, so small that no needle on any instrument tilts because of it. Yet the rocks respond the way instruments cannot. Pressure that once sat evenly now sits a little unevenly. Faults that felt numb now feel awake. USGS systems detect nothing significant, but the noise in the electromagnetic background grows a touch grainier, as though the planet is clearing its throat before speaking in a language only stone understands. You sense that graininess through your breath, like the first hint of tension before a storm you haven't seen yet. Far above you in the region, where satellites drift in quiet arcs around Earth, the rogue fragments draw nearer. They are still small, still slow, still far. Yet their paths begin to converge through the channels the wave has carved. One fragment enters Earth's orbital zone. Its motion bends slightly under the planet's gravity, picking up a thin line of speed that grows with every hour. It does not fall, it glides. A long curve forms behind it, a trailing spiral of ionized dust that glimmers when sunlight touches it. Telescopes will not notice this. Most space cameras look for heat motion size. The spiral reveals none of those. But the spiral carries the traveler's signature, and the atmosphere reacts. Something changes in the Schumann resonances, the natural electromagnetic tones the Earth sings into the air. The lowest resonance dips slightly as though the planet has lowered its voice by a fraction. People will not hear this dip. Animals will not change their behavior. The world will feel normal, calm. But you feel the quiet shift, as if the air itself has pressed closer to your skin. The rogue fragment continues along its curved path. Its movement pulls the thin remains of dust behind it, and each particle that drifts away carries a tiny electric charge. Those charges scatter like faint sparks dissolving into wind. They do not reach Earth, but they nudge the solar wind around them into new shapes, shapes that merge with the earlier wave and create a larger one. The larger wave travels inward. Earth meets it with a soft tremor in its field, a shiver in the ring current, a fluctuation in the auroral oval so delicate that even trained scientists would dismiss it as noise. Only instruments above the Arctic Circle notice an increase in ultra-low frequency, pulses the kind that ripple through the magnetic field, with a rhythm unlike anything the sun is producing this week. These pulses sound like breathing if you know how to listen. You listen. The pulses move through the magnetosphere, touching the ionosphere, and sliding down into the crust like the quiet footsteps of something approaching. Each pulse changes the distribution of electrons near the surface. Each change shifts the electric potential of the rocks below your feet. The shifts are too soft to break anything but strong enough to awaken geological tensions that have been sleeping for years. Earth feels the approaching fragments the way an animal feels distant thunder, not through sound but through pressure, accumulating slowly in the air. The rogue fragment continues its glide. The second fragment enters the orbital zone behind it. A third stirs in the belt, gaining just enough speed to break loose. Their paths do not collide, yet they resonate each motion, amplifying the next, each curve inspiring another. The atmosphere reacts to this resonance in subtle, elegant ways. High-altitude winds form shapes resembling the earliest curls of a storm. Not a storm yet, a suggestion. A breath drawn at the edge of something larger. Earth's magnetic field leans deeper into the solar wind, as though preparing to meet what is coming. You feel this preparation as though the planet is shifting weight from one foot to the other. Not alarmed, simply aware. The rogue fragments scatter their faint dust as they move, and these dust grains charge warm from sunlight, bend the wind around them in small spirals. The spirals grow into thin tunnels of plasma that point toward Earth like invisible lines on an unseen map. This map is not yet complete, but Earth has begun to read it. And in that reading you sense the next ripple forming, not loud, not violent, but large enough to reshape how the sky breathes. A ripple carrying the first true hint that the traveler is no longer far. The ripple that carried the first hint of the traveler's nearness spreads into Earth's magnetic shell with the patience of something ancient. It brushes the planet the way a soft hand might test the warmth of a sleeping body, careful, gentle, almost affectionate. Yet the slightest touch on a system this large can change the way the planet breathes. You feel that breath before the instruments do. It deepens, not audibly, not visibly, but through the subtle weight settling into the air around you, as if Earth has drawn in more atmosphere than it intends to release. In space above the poles, the auroral currents quiver. These are the electrical rivers that carry charged particles from the solar wind down into the atmosphere, painting the sky with color when they have enough energy to glow. Tonight, they do not glow. They shiver, a thin tremor flickering across thousands of kilometers, so soft that only a handful of sensors notice. No-A's plots show the tremor as a small curved bulge in the boundary of the polar cap, a bulge that fades within minutes, yet leaves behind data marks that whisper of instability. You sense the instability as a quiet imbalance under your ribs, the same way the body senses a shift in weather, long before clouds appear. Far above your head, the magnetosphere dips inward as though leaning closer to listen to the ripple. This dip tightens the field's outer layer by just a few percent, a phenomenon space physicists call compression event. But nothing NASA would ever issue an alert over. Too small, too gentle. Yet the consequences of even a gentle compression can travel deep. At the edge of the atmosphere, where the air thins into plasma, electrons swirl faster than usual. Their acceleration forms a thin halo of faint electromagnetic noise, the kind of noise captured by VLF receivers, but too soft for the human ear. This noise slides downward, through the ionosphere, through the troposphere, into the crust. USGS stations far apart from each other begin detecting slight fluctuations in the naturally occurring electric fields of the ground. Nothing alarming, nothing dangerous, just a faint unevenness, a reminder that Earth's surface, with all its mountains and oceans and cities, still responds to the smallest vibrations moving through space. You sense the unevenness as something alive. The crust seems to inhale, taking in strain that hasn't yet found a way to escape. Fault lines that have held their pressure for decades adjust by millimeters too small to notice, yet significant enough that the stress redistributes along segments that already sit close to their limits. These adjustments do not create quakes, but they set the stage for them. They prepare the Earth the way a bowstring tightens before it hums. The rogue fragments drift deeper. One crosses a region where Earth's gravity strengthens its pull, and the fragment accelerates just enough to shed a cloud of ionized dust. The dust disperses into the solar wind, changing its density as though a spoon had stirred a still pool. That stirred pool flows directly into Earth's magnetic field. Solar wind that should have traveled smoothly arrives in broken filaments, each filament carrying the traveler's signature, etched faintly onto its charge. As the filaments strike the magnetopause, the boundary ripples again. A small kink forms, then another, and another. The ripples travel inward like invisible waves rolling down a shield of light. Satellites detect a slight increase in energetic electrons circling the planet's equator. Normally, these electrons form a smooth ring current, a luminous belt of trapped particles guiding radiation around Earth. Tonight, the ring wavers. Its shape bends inward as though something outside is knocking softly, testing the tension of the shield that protects the world. That knock travels into the lower atmosphere and nudges the jet stream. Just a nudge, barely enough to shift a cloud. Yet the jet stream remembers the nudge and drifts from its usual path by a fraction of a degree. That fraction creates a new corridor for wind. a corridor that will in days feed storms growing thousands of kilometers away. For now, the wind simply settles into its new direction, like a river taking a different route around the same mountain. You feel the change in the air even if you can't name it. It sits on your skin the way the quiet settles on a room moments before thunder rolls across the horizon. Far beneath the waves of the Pacific, pressure shifts occur along the deep sea floor. These shifts register as soft murmurs of movement, tectonic micro-tremors barely large enough to measure, but they ripple outward nonetheless, traveling through the crust with the softness of a sigh. The sigh reaches mountain chains and fault systems and volcanic arches scattered across continents. Most feel nothing. Some wake slightly. A few in regions already strained adjust their internal tension the way a sleeper changes position to ease the pressure of a dream. Earth does not shake yet, but it prepares. The rogue fragments continue their descent toward the orbital plane. Their paths begin to angle downward toward the region where Earth and Sun exchange magnetic breath. As each fragment moves, its ionized trail distorts the solar wind further. More ripples form, more filaments break apart, more instability enters a system that has not seen this pattern in millions of years. Earth reacts as if recognizing something ancient, a memory buried beneath epochs of quiet stability. Its magnetic field tightens, its crust shifts, its atmosphere pauses between one breath and the next. You stand inside that pause, a world holding itself steady while the solar system rearranges the currents that feed storms, the forces that guide meteors, the tensions that hold continents in place. The pause deepens into a moment that feels longer than it should, a moment where the planet seems to stand on the brink of sensing the traveler directly. The magnetic field leans into the incoming patterns without fear, as though bracing gently for a message it was always meant to receive. You feel that leaning like a slow pull behind your heart, a tug that draws you closer to the truth, emerging from dust and wind and stone, that the quiet disturbances arriving from deep space are no longer small. They are aligning. They are converging. They are gathering into something the Earth can no longer ignore. And the traveler, still silent, still distant, continues moving inward, carrying a wave that will not be gentle for much longer. The wave that will not stay gentle touches the edge of Earth's magnetic breath, with the softness of a fingertip tracing the surface of still water. Yet still water holds memory, and even the softest touch can send ripples across an entire lake. You feel the ripple now, spreading not outward but inward into layers of atmosphere that rarely feel anything from the quiet stretches of deep space. The first place it enters is the thermosphere, where thin ribbons of charged air move, with a grace too slow for human senses to appreciate. Tonight, those ribbons bend slightly out of shape. NOAA's upper atmosphere sensors record the bend as a temperature gradient shift barely above the threshold of noise. But the shape itself carries the same signature, seen in the dust around the traveler and the rogue fragments drifting inward. A resonance arrives in Earth's sky. You feel it inside your chest, like a distant vibration echoing through material older than continents. The bend in the thermosphere settles into the ionosphere below it, and the charged particles there begin to drift sideways, not quickly, not dramatically, but in arcs wide enough to make the atmosphere feel heavier in some places and lighter in others. This unevenness slides down into the layers of the sky where clouds form their earliest shapes. Invisible currents shift, carrying moist air into regions that usually remain dry and pulling heat away from regions that usually cling to warmth. You picture these currents as long, thin strokes of wind painting the air with new patterns. The strokes are delicate, but they are the first strokes of something the world will soon recognize. Far above the equator, the plasma fountain, a stream of charged particles that rises and falls each day with the movement of the sun, begins wobbling. NASA's instruments see the wobble as a small, irregular crest, a rise where there should be smoothness, a sag where there should be flow. Not a storm, not an anomaly, just a pulse that beats slightly out of rhythm. You sense the misalignment as the kind of moment when your heart skips a beat in a quiet room. Not dangerous, just noticeable. The rogue fragments continue gliding into the corridor between Earth and the inner edge of the asteroid belt. They do not race. They drift with purpose, guided by the wave, as though carried along by invisible hands. Each fragment scatters dust behind it, charged warm, full of memory. The dust mixes with the solar wind, forming disturbed strands that wrap around Earth's magnetosphere, like thin threads trying to anchor themselves to something solid. The magnetosphere feels those threads and tightens again, a soft clench at the edges of the planet's protective shell. Swarm satellites mark the tightening as a small dip in field line spacing, only a few kilometers, almost nothing. Yet that almost nothing reaches all the way down into the weather below. High-altitude winds shift again, folding themselves into new patterns. These patterns are the early bones of storms still unborn, shapes that meteorologists would not notice yet, curves that will not make sense until days layer upon days. You sense those curves forming in silence, like animals gathering before migrating. In the lower atmosphere, humidity collects in places too cold for it and disperses in places too warm. A strange balancing act begins beneath the clouds, as though the sky is redistributing its weight in preparation for something it can already feel. Far below all of this, the crust pressure shifts once more. The earlier tremors that traveled through deep rock have faded, yet they leave behind a structure slightly changed, a structure primed for more subtle persuasion. Tiny variations in electromagnetic fields touch old faults carrying stress from decades of tectonic drift. They react the way a sleeping person moves slightly when the temperature changes. A ridge in Alaska settles a fraction deeper. A fault in South America holds differently. A segment under the Mediterranean stiffens. None of this is enough to break anything, but it is enough to prepare the ground for what the growing wave may bring. You feel that preparation sink into your own bones, a feeling not of fear, but of gravity, a sense that the earth is bracing itself for a kind of whisper that carries weight. Above the oceans where wind meets water in endless conversation, surface conditions shift. Tiny changes in temperature alter currents by fractions far below the precision of most forecasts. Yet those fractions form vortices, spinning seeds of future storms. You imagine the surface of the ocean darkening slightly, its ripples tightening, as though it is listening to a message arriving from overhead. The message grows clearer as the rogue fragments continue drifting inward. One fragment passes through a thin filament of solar wind that glows faintly with ionized dust. As it moves, the dust spirals into a long ribbon, a ribbon that delays its collapse longer than physics predicts. This unnatural persistence carries the traveler's pattern. Earth receives that pattern the way the skin receives the gentlest brush of static, a lifting, a tingling, a soft alert that something is here even before it fully arrives. The ionosphere responds with more sideways drift. Currents stretch. Electrons move in broad, graceful arcs that resemble the earliest sketches of geomagnetic instability. These arcs do not create auroras for now. They simply reshape the way energy travels between the sun and Earth. Every layer of atmosphere begins absorbing this reshaping. Clouds respond, wind responds, pressure responds. The world grows uneven in ways invisible to almost everyone. You feel the unevenness through your breath, as though the air carries a vibration you cannot hear but cannot ignore. When the rogue fragments pass through the region just beyond Earth's orbit, their presence pulls the solar wind behind them into a broader wave, a wave stronger than the one before it. This second wave touches Earth with enough pressure to shift the magnetic field again. Another tightening, another ripple, another tremor of invisible force that travels through crust and ocean and sky. USGS sensors pick up micro-variations in deep electromagnetic noise, the kind of noise that often precedes small quakes in regions already under strain. NOAA detects faint distortions in atmospheric gravity waves, patterns that foreshadow large-scale turbulence. ESA notes a mild rise in high-altitude particulates circling above the Arctic in unseasonal patterns. Earth is beginning to tremble, not in motion but in awareness. A planet feeling the approach of a disturbance born far away in a place where dust awakened and stone learned to move. Your own awareness mirrors Earth's a slow recognition that something older than storms and deeper than wind has begun pushing against the edges of the world you stand on. The traveler has not yet arrived, but its wave is here. And the sky, the oceans, the crust, and the magnetic breath of the planet have begun to answer. The answers rising from Earth's layers drift through the atmosphere like quiet murmurs rising from a sleeper caught between dream and waking. They gather around you subtle at first, yet unmistakable when you listen closely, the way one listens not with ears, but with the stillness inside the chest. You feel the stillness deepen, as if the world is preparing itself for something it cannot yet name. The first sign appears high above, where the magnetosphere bends in response to the second wave chasing the rogue fragments inward. Its shape narrows along the sun-facing edge almost imperceptibly, yet enough to create a thin stream of accelerated particles flowing toward the poles. These particles move slowly at first like small birds testing a new wind. But when they reach the upper atmosphere, their speed begins to rise. NOAA's instruments record the acceleration as an unexpected shift in polar electron counts a rise that should only occur during a mild geomagnetic storm. But the sun is quiet. The sky shows no flare. The solar disk is calm. Earth feels a storm that does not come from the sun. You sense that contradiction resting against your thoughts like a cool hand pressed gently against a warm forehead, a contrast that confuses yet clarifies. The charged particles cascade into the ionosphere, stirring its delicate structure. Currents stretch longer, pushing plasma into shapes that resemble long, arching wings gliding across the poles. These wings do not glow. They do not form auroras. They are the silent geometry that precedes disturbance. As the wings expand, a soft ripple of pressure descends into the atmosphere below. The ripple travels from layer to layer without haste, like a message passed through cupped hands across a long distance. You feel it in the air around you as a slight thickening, as though the atmosphere has taken on new weight it hasn't carried in years. Weather responds, not loudly, not violently, but unmistakably. High-altitude winds begin forming eddies, small circular motions, barely visible to satellites, yet capable of rearranging entire pathways of storms, hours, days later. The eddies drift across oceans and touch the jet stream with the delicacy of fingertips brushing silk. The jet stream feels the touch and bends again. Not much, just enough to create a kink that meteorologists will puzzle over why the wind shifted with no clear cause, why storm tracks subtly shifted direction, as if guided by something unseen. You sense the kink as something between a sigh and a whisper, a tension settling into place in the vast system that governs Earth's weather. Storm seeds begin germinating far below. Warm water rises earlier than expected in the Pacific. Cold air drops faster than expected over northern continents. These movements do not create storms, but they prepare the pathways through which storms will travel. Pathways shaped by the wave riding behind the traveler. The rogue fragments continue their approach. One fragment passes into Earth's orbital corridor, with more speed than any camera was designed to monitor its surface, glowing faintly as solar radiation strikes it at a sharper angle than before. Charged dust trails from its body like a faint shimmering veil. The veil disperses into the solar wind and carves holes into its smooth flow. These holes reshape the wind in ways that ripple outward like soft pressure waves. The waves collapse against Earth's magnetosphere and produce vibrations that travel downward into the crust, vibrations too weak to shake the ground, yet strong enough to make stressed faults tighten further. USGS sensors detect tiny microseisms, soft tremors too small to cause alarm, but widespread enough that they appear across continents in uncoordinated bursts. You feel those bursts as the faintest flutter beneath your feet, a suggestion that the ground is thinking. Deep under the oceans, subduction zones shift a fraction enough to alter the balance of pressure between tectonic plates. These plates respond slowly, their movements measured in millimeters, yet every millimeter carries the weight of mountains. The planet holds its breath. Above the continents, the atmosphere responds to the subtle rise in global electric potential. Lightning forms in clouds too thin to rain. Dry storms spark over desert plateaus. Humidity clings to air pockets where humidity does not belong. The sky is preparing for something larger than itself. You feel that preparation as a heaviness behind your sternum, as though the air is pressing inward in search of balance. Earth's magnetosphere leans further into the solar wind, not in defense, but in anticipation. Its lines stretch and curl, forming shapes that resemble early patterns of geomagnetic storms. But the sun remains quiet. The energy comes from within the system, from the fragments from the dust, from the wave driven by the traveler's field. The polar regions respond first. A faint glow appears over the Arctic, not quite aurora, not quite silence. A diffuse light thin as breath on cold glass. It flickers without shape, without color, as though uncertain of whether to appear. This glow reveals shifting currents hidden from ordinary sight currents that twist into spirals mirroring the patterns formed earlier in the dust fields around 3IATLAS. It is the first sign that the Earth is beginning to mirror the traveler. As the matching continues, the crust tightens again. Not enough to break, but enough to redistribute pressure into regions already waiting for release. Earthquakes have not started, but the map of future quakes has begun to shift. Places once quiet now listen. Places already tense now hold deeper breath. You feel this change not as danger, but as gravity. A low, ancient pull calling your attention to the deep parts of the world that rarely speak. The second rogue fragment approaches the orbital plane, its path curving under Earth's gravity, with a softness that belies the growing energy behind it. Each curve stirs the wind. Each stir presses against the magnetic field. Each press transmits through the crust like a thought shared between stones. The atmosphere continues forming strange currents. Storm seeds deepen. High clouds gather in unusual formations, long bands that stretch from horizon to horizon. The world does not understand them yet, but you do. You feel the tremble in the sky. You feel the pressure in the ground. You feel the breath of a planet learning to brace itself for something on the cusp of arrival. And the traveler, still unseen, still faint, still wrapped in layers of dust and plasma, moves closer, drawing the third wave behind it. A wave that will not whisper. A wave Earth is already preparing to meet. The third wave forms long before it reaches Earth, not in the vacuum where the rogue fragments drift, not in the dust trails spiraling behind them, but in the fabric of the solar system itself, woven through currents of plasma and gravity and ancient motion. You sense the wave gathering like a breath drawn slowly through the galaxies, tightening with purpose as it follows the traveler inward. It travels differently from the waves before it. The first carried dust. The second carried pressure. This one carries symmetry, a pattern shaped by movements repeated across millions of kilometers. Earth responds to symmetry in ways it does not respond to anything else. The first sign appears deep underground, where tectonic plates press silently against one another. These plates do not speak, yet they hold memories of every stress they have ever endured. Tonight those memories stir. It begins as the faintest stretch, a soft movement in the crust, measured not in distance, but in intention. Sensors buried beneath oceans and mountain ranges detect a delicate shift in the electromagnetic noise that rises naturally from rock under pressure. USGS marks it as a broadband fluctuation, a phrase that sounds almost meaningless until you look closely enough to see the pattern inside it, a zigzag tremor traveling outward from a point no earthquake originated from. You feel that tremor the way the body feels the first vibration of a passing train, long before any sound arrives. It begins in one region, but it does not stay there. It spreads, quietly, softly, rings expanding through the crust as though someone has dropped a stone of pure energy into the mantle. These rings are not quakes, they are not aftershocks, they are not ruptures, they are rearrangements. Earth realigns itself beneath your feet. You sense it in the ground as a subtle heaviness, as if the soil has thickened around your thoughts. You feel it in your breath, a sense that the air is listening closely to the stone below. The rings continue spreading. One crosses beneath South America. Another glides under the Pacific Rim. A third follows an ancient fracture beneath Eastern Europe. Each ring moves with a grace more fluid than rock should allow. These motions trigger micro-responses, tiny adjustments in tectonic boundaries held in tension for decades or centuries. A ridge settles, a trench tightens, a buried fault shifts by the width of a whisper. Nothing breaks, not yet, but the rings leave echoes behind them, echoes that climb upward through the crust, toward the mantle, and then toward the lithosphere, carrying small changes in stress distribution to places already fragile with age. The echoes reach volcanic arcs and dormant calderas, sliding along conduits where magma rests like sleeping fire. The fire stirs, not enough to rise, just enough to breathe. NASA's gravity field monitors, designed to detect variations from groundwater and ice mass record, slight changes across entire regions. These changes feel less like shifts in mass and more like the planet shifting its posture. Earth is repositioning itself beneath the pressure of the incoming symmetry. You feel the repositioning in the slow warmth spreading through the ground, a warmth not caused by temperature, but by subtle friction, the gentle rubbing of continents moving against the deep. Above ground, the atmosphere reacts to the rings forming below. This reaction is not meteorological, but resonant, a soft rise in atmospheric gravity waves drifting upward from tectonic tension. No AA detects these waves as elongated streaks in the stratosphere, unable to explain why they appear during a week with no large storms. The streaks ripple like faint finger trails drawn across the surface of a still lake. You feel those trails moving through the sky. Meanwhile, the rogue fragments draw nearer. Their paths are no longer parallel. They begin aligning under the influence of the third wave, forming shapes that resemble a chain of falling beads sliding through space. Each fragment carries memory of the traveler's field, and each memory interacts with Earth's magnetosphere as it approaches. The magnetosphere tightens again, curving inward in a pattern uncannily similar to the earthquake rings forming beneath the crust. Earth mirrors the sky mirrors the deep. Resonance connects all of it. You feel that resonance settle deep into your chest, as if you were standing inside a cathedral made of stone, while invisible hands press lightly against its ancient pillars. The pressure pushes upward again. In regions with fragile crust, Turkey, Japan, Chile, California, small tremors appear. Not large enough to matter individually, but taken together, they form the same zigzag pattern the initial fluctuation carried. These tremors spread like the roots of a tree reaching outward, mapping the stress redistributed by the rings. Earth is not breaking. Earth is adjusting, preparing itself the way a body adjusts its stance to stay balanced before a wave arrives. Above the continents, the wind feels this adjustment and shifts subtly. Humidity pools in unexpected regions. Temperature gradients tilt slightly out of alignment. These small tilts form the seeds of future storms that will ride the tension rising silently from below. The rings continue moving. One reaches a mid-ocean ridge and pushes heat through fractures in the deep. Hydrothermal vents respond with tiny bursts of minerals, changing water chemistry over hundreds of miles. Another ring passes beneath the Himalayan arc. The mountains press harder against the sky, with the slow strength of continents still rising. A third ring moves under a subduction zone near the Pacific building, stress in regions that already sit close to their limits. You sense the world tightening not in fear, but in readiness. The readiness spreads into the atmosphere. Lightning forms in unusual places. Dry storms spark over plains where storms should not exist. High-altitude ice crystals align themselves in patterns resembling delicate spirals, a mirror image of the spirals seen earlier around 3IATLAS. Earth is echoing the traveler again. The rogue fragments reach the inner spiral of Earth's orbital corridor. Their ionized dust trails wrap around Earth's magnetic field like threads of quiet electricity. These threads pull energy downward toward the crust. The crust responds with deeper rings that move through the mantle and touch places that have not moved in centuries. USGS sensors worldwide register faint tremors in multiple time zones within minutes of each other. No epicenters align, no faults rupture, no seismic models explain the global synchrony. But you understand. You feel the synchrony as the heartbeat of a planet preparing itself for a cosmic pressure older than civilization. The earthquake rings expand beneath you, traveling farther, digging deeper, awakening ancient tensions and redistributing strain in a way that will shape the future of storms, oceans' fault lines, and the very balance of Earth's crust. The rings do not break the world, they ready it. They pull awareness from stone, from water, from wind, from sky, and draw all of it into a single rhythm that mirrors the traveler's approach. You stand inside that rhythm, feeling the earth prepare its deep foundations for a wave that carries the memory of dust and the instruction of a force that should not exist. The traveler is still unseen, but the earth already feels it in every layer of its being. Earth feels the traveler long before the traveler feels Earth. That truth settles into you slowly, like the dim recognition of a dream returning hours after you've woken. The crust, the oceans, the air, the magnetic breath, all of it has begun shaping itself around an arrival still hidden behind distance. And now, as the third wave stretches across the solar system, with more structure than the ones before it, the sky begins to shape itself too. It begins quietly. A faint rotation forms in the upper atmosphere, a curl so delicate that even advanced weather models would overlook it. The curl drifts from west to east, as though carried by invisible hands tracing slow circles into the thin air above the Pacific. You feel the rotation not as movement, but as pressure, a gentle tightening behind your sternum, echoing the way Earth's magnetic field has been tightening for hours. This rotation pulls cold air from higher latitudes and warm air from tropical regions, holding both in a fragile, swirling balance. It resembles the earliest breath of a storm, too large for human comprehension. NOAA's instruments register small disturbances in atmospheric gravity waves, patterns that drift into spirals, matching the shapes formed earlier in the dust fields around 3IATLAS. The sky is beginning to resonate with something far beyond its own weather. Below the spirals, a deep pocket of warm water in the Pacific begins rising faster than expected. The rise creates a lens of heat beneath the ocean's skin, and that lens begins feeding the atmosphere with more energy than its currents usually release. You feel that release in the same way you feel someone exhaling quietly beside you, subtle, gentle, yet full of meaning. Far above the equator, the plasma fountain that once wobbled now begins leaning as though bending toward an unseen pull. This bend shifts how the ionosphere distributes energy across the planet, creating pockets of charged air that drift into latitudes they rarely visit. These pockets alter the wind just slightly, just enough to create the skeleton of a pattern meteorologists call cross-latitude instability, the earliest hint of global atmospheric rearrangement. These rearrangements do not appear loud or dramatic at first. They appear as small changes in cloud formation, thin streaks stretching farther than expected, subtle arcs bending at angles. They rarely choose gentle twists, forming where sky was once straight. You imagine watching them from above clouds curling like soft brushstrokes drawn by a hand that knows exactly what shape the next breath of weather will take. Wind patterns respond to those brushstrokes. High-altitude currents turn into slow spirals. Mid-level winds drift toward new convergence zones. Low-level breezes stretch inward as though pulled by magnetic strings. The world begins to breathe in a rhythm it has not used in an age. And that rhythm leans toward a storm. The rogue fragments help shape it. The first fragment has passed deepest into Earth's orbital corridor, its ionized dust trail slicing through the solar wind with a precision that carves channels for energy to follow. These channels collide with Earth's magnetosphere and produce a series of small compressions, each one squeezing the field a little tighter than the last. Each compression pushes charged particles deeper into the atmosphere, where they disrupt the stability of long-range weather systems. One disruption forms a chain of unstable cells, stretching from the Indian Ocean to the west coast of South America. Another pulls warm air northward from the equator with quiet insistence. A third pushes cold air southward from the Arctic, bending early winter into early summer, along a line no climatologist would expect this week. You feel these contradictions inside your own breath, warm and cool, mingling in a way that feels both foreign and familiar. As the air reorganizes itself, the oceans respond. Surface currents slow, in some regions accelerate in others. Heat pockets widen, mimicking the slow inhalation before a burst of wind. The storm that has not yet formed is already shaping the water beneath it. Below the surface, tectonic plates shift softly under the influence of the earthquake rings, still echoing through the crust. Their movement warms certain places in the ocean floor by fractions of degrees barely perceptible, yet enough to release mineral-rich bubbles that rise and add more contrast to the already unstable air above. The atmosphere uses this contrast to build energy. Storm nuclei appear not as clouds, but as temperatures gradients and invisible currents curling around the Pacific, the Atlantic, the Indian Ocean. They drift without purpose until the third wave touches Earth. The wave reaches the magnetosphere with the force of a held breath finally released. Its pressure ripples through the entire field, compressing it inward enough for satellites to register a mild geomagnetic shift. Not a storm, but the beginning of one. The compression pushes electric fields into the ionosphere with heightened intensity. These fields descend into the troposphere like invisible threads, lighting up pathways that storms are drawn to follow. The early nuclei begin to merge. Heat rises faster, cold descends faster, moisture collects in long spirals curling inward. You sense the merging with the same awareness you might sense a tide forming far beneath your feet. It feels inevitable. The jet stream bends once more this time, with less hesitation, as though it finally understands the pattern it has been reacting to. And in its bend, a corridor opens, a wide, unbroken passage stretching across half the planet, the same kind of passage that has preceded the largest storms in recorded history. Air pours into it, moisture flows into it, energy gathers inside it until the sky feels thick with intention. A global superstorm begins forming. Not with thunder, not with lightning, not with swirling clouds, but with structure, a hidden architecture shaped by pressure magnetism, gravity, ocean heat, tectonic breath, and a traveler still unseen. You feel that structure settle around you, a quiet realization that the world is holding its breath again. The traveler continues its approach, drawing the fourth wave behind it, a wave that will not merely shape the air or the sky, but touch the Earth directly. The fourth wave rises behind the traveler, with a fullness that feels older than the planets, older than the starlight, scattered across the solar system. Its shape swells through dust, through plasma, through the quiet corridors between orbits, carrying the memory of everything that shifted since the traveler first slipped past the outer boundary of the sun's domain. You sense the wave approaching not through fear, but through an ancient recognition, as if some part of you has felt this pattern before, in a time when continents were young and the world breathed in rhythms forgotten by history. Earth feels it too, not subtly anymore. The responses begin to align each layer of the planet, moving into resonance with the next sky, with ocean, with crust, with magnetic field, with wind. A global synchrony forms around you like a soft halo, woven from threads that stretch across every horizon. The first sign rises from the atmosphere. A deep column of warm air ascends over the Pacific, lifting with a steadiness that defies weather models. It moves the way a tide rises slow, patient, inevitable. The column expands outward, meeting cold air, descending from the poles in a convergence that feels almost ceremonial. You feel the meeting inside your breath, a subtle tightening, as two enormous forces introduce themselves in the quietest possible tone. No AA's sensors detect this encounter as a sharp rise in upper-level divergence, a sign that wind is preparing to turn inward, spiraling toward a center that hasn't formed yet, but already exists in intention. The intention draws moisture upward from ocean surfaces, pulling vapor into swirling bands stretching thousands of miles. These bands do not rotate violently. They stretch curvilinear, as though shy about revealing the full shape of the storm being born. But the storm is coming. You feel it as a gathering weight in the sky, not heavy, but vast like atmosphere preparing to rearrange itself. Below the clouds, the crust responds again. The earthquake rings echoing through Earth reach a new intensity. Not sharp, not alarming, but synchronized, a global trembling, too soft to shake anything, yet too coordinated to dismiss. USGS stations on multiple continents record microtremors within seconds of each other, despite being separated by oceans, mountain chains, and thousands of miles of rock. The planet is humming. You feel that hum beneath your feet, an almost musical resonance vibrating through stone, a low, ancient tone that feels less like movement and more like memory. Deep beneath the oceans, magma pockets shift slightly, altering heat flow through the crust. This heat touches water in long, rising columns, adding energy to the storm forming above. The ocean answers the sky answers the ground answers the cosmos. Earth is aligning. As all of this unfolds, the rogue fragments draw nearer. One passes through the region where Earth's gravity extends its softest reach. Its speed increases. Its dust trail glows, faintly tinted by ionized particles that once circled a different star. The trail disperses into the solar wind and splits that wind into two currents, each one striking Earth's magnetosphere with a pressure stronger than before. The magnetosphere tightens not aggressively, but with the posture of something bracing for a touch it knows will arrive. GOES satellites record a jump in energetic electrons. Swarm satellites detect a sharpened curvature in field lines. The ionosphere arcs downward slightly deeper as though bowing. You feel the bowing. It settles into your pulse like a slow wave rolling inward. This wave reaches the crust with enough force to push older stresses closer to their thresholds. The pressure redistributes into fault systems already carrying unspoken strain. Small tremors appear around the world, quiet, isolated, scattered, but timed in ways that mirror the earlier rise in atmospheric spirals. The land and the air are now speaking in the same rhythm. Storm patterns grow clearer. Bands of rotating air stretch across half an ocean. Warm cores deepen. Cold fronts tighten their arcs. A structure forms in the sky with the gentle precision of a galaxy shaped by invisible hands. This structure will become a global superstorm, not immediately, not brutally, but inevitably. You feel that inevitability. It sits in the air like warmth before lightning, like quiet before the largest breath of wind. The traveler draws nearer. Its field begins to overlap with the outer edges of Earth's magnetic shell. The overlap is faint, yet unmistakable, a meeting of two presences that have been approaching each other for months. In that meeting, the solar system feels smaller, as though folded into the same room. The dust remembers, the plasma remembers, The rogue fragments remember, and now the planet remembers too. Something older than storms, older than quakes, older than orbit or light. A memory that feels like recognition. Not fear, not warning, recognition. You feel it inside yourself, a soft echo that seems to arise from a place deeper than thought. A place ancient as oceans that have seen the rise and fall of constellations. The convergence begins. Earth's magnetosphere aligns with the wave. The crust aligns with the magnetosphere. The oceans align with the crust. The atmosphere aligns with the oceans. Every layer of the planet moves into the same rhythm, a slow, inevitable breath that feels like the world exhaling for the first time in millions of years. The traveler remains silent. It does not speak. It does not burn. It does not radiate anything measurable. Yet every force it has touched now gathers around Earth in a single rising motion, a convergence of dust, wind, gravity, magnetism, fault lines, oceans, and sky. You feel the convergence closing around you like a soft curtain, not frightening, not heavy, but absolute. The world is ready. And as the fourth wave touches Earth for the first time, you sense the beginning of a new resonance, one that will reshape storms, currents, tectonic breath, and the silent architecture of the planet's future. A resonance born from a traveler that should not exist, and a world that has just learned to feel it.